Fighting for the Imperial-held city had been going on for weeks. Though the Imperium had suffered very few defeats, the fierce Orks drew ever closer to the city walls. Evacuation of the citizens had been initiated, and mostly completed, for the higher-ups feared that in one particular opening the Orks might break through. A small part of the wall was destroyed, and the Imperium had their guard create a quick makeshift guard force here, accompanied by a few sentinels, turrets, and a Lehman Russ used as a static turret also. Armored reinforcements were underway, Intel said, but would probably not reach them in time, as before them stood the mighty army of the Orks. Each and every one of them craved the feeling of combat, the warmth of blood on their hands. Time and time, the Orks would throw themselves again onto the Imperium of Man, and though they suffered incredible losses, they managed to reach all the way to the city's edge, defining in their minds that they were doing something right. Their growls and war shouts could be heard all across the battlefield, resulting in some Imperial Guard to shiver in fear, though few dared to show it. They had heard that their chances were bleak, but also knew that the commissars that were present would shoot anyone who'd even try to run. The commissars ordered their men to stand and fight in the name of the Emperor, that they were what stood between the Orks and the entrance to the city, and that the city could never, ever fall under the dirty hands of the Greenskins. And then one particular shout could be heard above all others, and the ground began to shake, as the Green Horde started to move. The order was given by the war boss for his boys to start the attack. Many could not control themselves, made sounds that were close to mania to those never having fought in a battle against them. Their weapons were pointed straight forward, ready to shred the enemy. As the ground shook more and more, every Imperial Guard held its breath. They were coming. Then footsteps could be heard by a handful of Imperial Guard who could not take the stress as they ran down the trench. What followed were loud screams of the commissars, followed by perfectly aimed shots and the sounds of bodies being dropped. An example of what would happen to anyone trying to run. As the Orks reached the range of the Imperium's weapons, the signal was given to unleash hell upon their enemies. The Orks welcomed the slaughter as some increased their tempo as they ran into the burning blasts. Immediately, Orks were shredded all over the battlefield, with literal chunks flying all over the place. But the sound of explosion and death were like music to most, and many never lowered their weapons as all they desired was to fire it upon their doomed enemy. The Imperial Guard, on the other hand, experienced real terror. It was once said that the average lifespan of an Imperial Guard is 15 hours, but for these men, it was closer to 15 seconds. Clouds of red blood spew all over the trenches as many were sent to an early grave before they even knew what hit them. The craters from earlier impacted artillery actually worked as cover for the Orks, hiding even the biggest among them. This made it possible to get ever closer and closer, making their aim more effective. Within the chaos, the Imperial Guards had no idea if they were doing real damage against the Ork charge. People died left and right, and many fired panicked frenzies all around them. The shouts of the commissars were muffled by explosions and the Ork screams. More Imperial Guard ran in fear, and though the commissars did notice this, it was difficult to shoot every last one of them within the chaos. As a matter of fact, the Imperial Guard were actually able to take down a whole bunch of incoming Orks. But the problem with Orks is that there are always more. Despite taking losses, the deafening sound of their war shouts did not diminish, still striking fear in the hearts of their tiny adversaries. As they got closer and closer, they now managed to get past the final craters, meaning they were now eye to eye with the Imperial Guard. Some of the men had never fought orcs before and were startled by their size and terrorizing impression. It became here very apparent how underwhelming their firepower was, as they were forced to use scouting gear in a defensive state. Despite still being able to hurt many an orc who came close to the trench, it was not enough to stop the tidal wave of greenskins that seemed endless. The fact that the orcs were now so close gave a clear target for the Imperial Guard to shoot at. But the same counted for the orcs, and more guards perished as the scenario of fleeing units repeated itself more and more. Those who managed to escape the wrath of the Emperor via the commissars would be dealt with later. The orcs were now on the Imperial Guard's doorstep. They managed to flank their right side and even enter their trench, which was disastrous for the Imperial Guard. Some even stopped running and were simply standing in the open, picking off targets which were caught in the trench that would become their grave. Wrecks were burning, its smoke that rose in the sky signaling to High Command that this side was fallen and that the orcs would soon enter the city. The left flank of the trench actually continued to fight on bravely. Their battle had already been lost, as the trench itself was taken and the first of the greenskins were entering the city. But none on the left flank ever left their post, as they kept firing at the orcs, who were delighted that more potential victims presented themselves. Despite their valiant attempt, these Imperial Guard were no match for the orcs. They lost most of their turret support and simply had too few in number to really hurt the orcs. Yet still none ran, and they all stood the ground to the last man. The orcs then started to focus entirely on entering the city, its inner defensive units already firing onto the battlefield. Word had reached High Command that the city had been breached. They indeed expected reinforcements to not arrive in time, but they were not panicked yet. It had been confirmed that the Astartes were being sent in to deal with the situation in the city. They would make sure to eradicate the greenskins from within, while the armor originally meant to head towards the walls would be sent somewhere else. For at the same time, across a large sprawling field ahead of the city, more battles were being fought, and a different orc army was about to charge after one of their ships had crashed into the ground. They had some heavier units here, and the artillery station for the Imperial Guard was broken. The orcs knew that the city had been breached, taunting the puny humans in front of them, slurring that they would soon join the others in the grave. Especially since this particular guard force was even more underpowered compared to the makeshift defensive unit. The Imperium could not afford a second orc attack from a different flank on the city, but they also knew that backup was necessary. On the question, "What are your orders, my lord?" High Command answered, "Send in the Baneblades."